The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.
Welcome to the show, all Cherries fans, all Southampton fans, and of course the rest of the Premier League. We have got the South Coast Derby. It's finally here. Saints are back in the Premier League. And do you know what? I'm chuffed to see them back here. Now, before we get stuck into our opposition preview show with a very, very special guest and also an interview as well, here's a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. Find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Now, can Russell Martin keep Saints marching in the Premier League for another season? That's the big question that I'm putting to my very special guest. And he knows quite a bit about it because he presented Soccer Sunday and also the Monday Night Football show for many, many years. Also, he's now heading up ITV Sport. And his final game for Sky Sports was AFC Bournemouth on a Tuesday night, last game of the season. You'll have to watch on to find out more. It is a pleasure to welcome on former Sky Sports presenter and ITV Sport horse racing presenter, Ed Chamberlin. Welcome to Up the Cherries in all departments, Ed. How are you doing?
Very good form, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent stuff. And thank you so much for joining us. So what I want to do firstly is I want to touch on your background. You grew up in Shepton Mallet, which, firstly, what was it like growing up in Somerset and what attracted you to Southampton in particular?
So it was my grandparents who actually lived in Somerset and my dad was a soldier. So they were often abroad and my grandparents actually lived in Bruton. So as you can imagine, I don't remember it much, but I imagine my mum would have been with them and rushed to Shepton Mallet Hospital because I was a Hampshire boy really growing up. My dad was they're called the Rifles now. He was a Green Jacket and based in Winchester and we lived just outside Andover. So I was a Hampshire boy really and have supported Southampton all my life as the local club and obviously grew up watching them and going to the old Dell back in the day. So yeah, Somerset in the very, very early days, but Hampshire through and through.
Who were your heroes growing up when you was watching Saints?
So I think most people would think my hero is probably Matt Lettiz and absolutely loved him and got to work with him for years. But growing up, it was actually a player called Steve Williams, who was a fabulous midfield player, competent midfield player. He wore number 4. And he was as good a midfield player as I've seen at Southampton. Morgan Schneiderlin would be the closest thing to Steve Williams since his day. And we were a really good side in those days. We finished second in the league in the mid-80s. We had Mark Wright, Keegan, Shilton, Steve Moran, who I heard about the other day, Armstrong. We were a decent team. And it was a horrible place to have to go, the Dell. The Dell was a pretty horrible place to watch football, let alone be a visiting team. But Steve Williams gave the team real guile and class in midfield. And the day he went to Arsenal, honestly, it was like as a kid at that age, with posters all over your bedroom wall, your world absolutely ends. I remember being absolutely devastated when he signed for Arsenal. And since then, I've learned that he had a bit of a reputation, Steve, and had a few run-ins with George Graham. And yeah, but what a player. What a player.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that you've interviewed quite a lot of Southampton players in the past as well. And one of those was Mickey Channon as well. And of course, we'll come on to your love of horse racing. But how did you find Mickey?
So if I'm asked, I'm often asked, like in racing publications, like the Racing Post, for my ideal dinner guests, and I always have Mick Channon at the top of the list for so many different reasons. He combines the two, away from my family, of course, the two loves of my life in horse racing and Southampton. His playing career slightly predates me. I've obviously seen lots of him on tape and what have you. I can't remember whether I saw him in real life. I probably did, but I certainly can't remember it. And so I wouldn't classify him as my footballing hero, but my all-round hero. And he's so entertaining, honestly. You can't fail to have your life lifted if you're in the company of Mick Channon. Great stories, great character, brilliant player, brilliant trainer in the world of racing as well. And anyone who comes onto the pitch at half-time, looks up at the director's box, looking for the racing results, is very high up in my estimations. And Mick Channon, an absolute legend in two different sports, and the two different sports I love more than any other. So yeah, he's right up there. He's great fun. Great fun.
In your interview, he did seem that as well, and seemed to be so. He's just so relaxed, isn't he? He's so relaxed about everything, but also very, very. He gives a lot of encouragement to the new riders as well, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But he's also not sure. He's a great person to interview because he'll always give you a news line. He's never shying away from controversy, Mick Channon, and you're always a bit nervous when you do it live on ITV because his language can be very colourful indeed at times. And his boys are great. Jack Shannon's taken over the licence now, also a Southampton fan and a great lad. And Michael Channon, his son's written a great book. They're a brilliant family, and they've had a lot of bad luck in life, the Shannons. And Mick, in racing parlance, has been pretty lame at times, but he's still going strong. I saw him the other day at the races. He put a bit of weight on and looked in really good form.
Excellent stuff. Well, I understand as well that you were quite a good cricketer as well, Ed, weren't you?
I had my moments. I used to love it. I used to absolutely love it. And I used to go and, with the Dale and Northlands Road in Southampton, virtually next door to each other. God, I had some happy days when I was a youngster, and you used to be a member of the cricket club. Honestly, you used to be a junior member at Hampshire for about, crikey, between 6 and 10 quid a year, I think it was. And I used to absolutely rinse that and go all the time. And in those days, as a schoolboy, you used to be able to play on the outfield in the intervals. Great fun place to go and watch cricket, and very inexpensive as well. And I also love playing. But in my 20s, I gave up cricket, and I never quite knew why. And I remember my cricket kit and whites and everything were chucked up in the attic, and I thought I'd never want to see them again. And when I presented at Glorious Goodwood, my first year on ITV, it was 2017, and I was asked to play cricket. So the Duke of Richmond, who lives in Goodwood House, has an 11 that take on the Lord's Taverners. And they said, "Do you want to play?" And I thought, that's too good an opportunity to miss, playing in a beautiful place like Goodwood, in front of Goodwood House on a summer evening after the first day of Glorious Goodwood. So I went, yeah, I'll play. So the kit came out of the attic, and it got off to a disastrous start because as I walked out to bat, the glue on my boots, which hadn't been used in 20 odd years, clearly had stopped functioning, and the sole of my cricket shoe came away from the boot. So I chucked it away, hugely embarrassed, and walked out to bat against Gladstone Small, Andy Caddick, and all these ex-England players, effectively in barely more than socks. But I was so embarrassed about what had happened with the cricket shoes, I didn't tell anybody. And it was a bit like a golfer who'd had the yips, but I'd forgotten that I'd had the yips. I'd forgotten what the issue was. And I still can't remember why I'd given up cricket. But I went in, and about third ball, I can't remember who was bowling at me. I think it was the old Warwickshire player, Neil Smith. And it was absolutely dreamy. And summer's evening in front of Goodwood House, Gower and Gatting were the two umpires. And honestly, as a cricketer, I was in heaven. And Neil Smith hit me halfway up my pad. I was absolutely smack in front. I don't think I'd scored at the time. And Mike Gatting, who was umpiring, just looked at me, smiled, and said not out. And I just went, oh my God, thank you, Mike. How lucky am I? And then I thought, I've got a free innings here. So I started to open my shoulders. And yeah, I got 60 or 70 that day. It was in the Daily Telegraph. I remember it. Haven't been able to do that since, but thoroughly enjoyed it. but I'm going to retire now. I've got to 50. I'm 50 in real terms, and I think that's probably the end of my cricketing career.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, you did join Sky Sports in 1999, but what I wanted to find out a little bit more about was what you did prior to that.
So I actually went to lecture. I went to the sixth form college in Winchester today, Peter Simmons, to talk them through my career. I sort of had to remember what I'd done. It's so long ago. But yeah, so I read politics, would you believe, at Exeter University, which I loved, but I had no desire to go into politics. I wanted to work in sport. And at the time, I thought I wanted to work in horse racing. And I got on what was called in those days the British Horse Racing Board, who run racing, now called the BHA. In those days, it was the BHB. I got on their development scheme when I left and got my degree. And I wanted to work in racecourse management. I wanted to work at Ascot or Goodwood or one of these big tracks. And that's what I applied to do. There were 12 of you on this development course. And I got sent to Ladbrokes, the bookmakers. And I thought, oh, no, that's not what I want to do at all. So I thought I'd just do my 10 days, 2 weeks work experience, and then I'd go and get a proper job down here somewhere. But got in there, and honestly, I just loved it. I loved it. I learned so much about life and working, and I was working in sport. I couldn't believe it. 1 minute I was pricing up a darts tournament, then I was working in the Ladbrokes shop on the North End Road, which was a good life experience. But I very quickly realised that cricket and racing were my two things, really, because the football department was all wrapped up. That was in those days, becoming a bigger business. It wasn't the be all and end all. It was all about horse racing for a bookmaker in those days. And I then became an odds compiler. So I was the one who was pricing up the races to go into the betting shops. I became the cricket odds compiler, and I lived a dream at Ladbrokes for, crikey, 3 or 4 years. Then was ready to do something new after the 1999 Cricket World Cup, where I got it wrong. I got it expensively wrong in a Pakistan v Bangladesh game. And I was all in on Pakistan from the start of the tournament, and they actually got beat in the final, which proved pretty costly for both me and Ladbrokes. And it was then time to look for another career. And I went and started up a magazine called Sports Advisor Magazine, and very nearly made it big at Sports Advisor Magazine. And then came the internet crash, which pretty much made the end of us as an entity, which was a shame. But to promote the magazine, I went on Bloomberg Television in the City of London to promote the magazine, talk about sport on a Friday. And it just shows you these days, for any youngster listening in, it only takes one set of ears or eyes to see you or hear you, and you're off and running. And I was lucky because the deputy head of Sky Sports watched me. I don't know where he was. He was somewhere in the Far East, I think, in a hotel watching Bloomberg Television, and thought, that kid has got a bit about him. So he got me into Sky Sports for a screen test, which I absolutely butchered because I was a journalist, not a TV presenter. And he got me into his office afterwards and said, God, you were terrible compared to what I was expecting, but we're going to give you a chance. And I started on a show called Sky Sports Centre, as you say, in 1999 with Kirsty Gallagher and Matt Lorenzo. And I learned on my feet. I was dressed like a sort of city trader. I looked like an absolute fool doing the betting and Opta stats on a Friday night, and just could not believe my luck. And again, a lesson to any youngster. Once your foot's in the door, and my foot was in the door at Sky, I thought, what an opportunity this is for me. And yeah, took advantage of it. And though, to be honest, my television career to start with was a bit of a disaster because that show didn't work. Then I did a show called 90 Minutes, which disappeared when Kirsty went to a show called Rise, and she took every viewer I think we had with her. And then I did a show called 90 Minutes with Jeff Stelling, who I think's the best presenter in the business. And even that didn't work. So I'm thinking, I'm not sure this is going to work out in television. I was known at Sky as the Grim Reaper because every show I did got culled. It died. So I'm thinking I'm going to have to go and do something else. But then I was given my chance on Sky Sports News, and then I was off and running.
How much did you enjoy working with Jeff?
He was brilliant. He's from round here as well. He's an Alsford resident, and Southampton would be his second team. So he's obviously best known for Hartlepool, but we had a mutual liking of Southampton Football Club, which helped. And he's just a great guy. Unbelievable presenter. Honestly, unbelievable presenter. I learned so much from him. A genius in so many ways. A man who knows when to have fun and when to be serious, and just with the sharpest brain you could imagine. I mean, my hero growing up as a presenter was Des Lynam, who was the king. He was the doyen of sports presenters. But Jeff wouldn't be too far behind. And then when my career took me in the Sky Sports News arena, I was then in 2 or 3 years down the track doing the midweek soccer specials and just learning off Jeff. He would do the Saturdays and I would just watch him. And I knew I couldn't be Jeff Stelling, and in no way would I ever try and impersonate him. But, you learn an awful lot from someone like that, with his journalistic brain. Just an unbelievably skillful presenter who I admire enormously.
You did present as well when there was draws for the World Cup, the European Championships, the Champions League. You did present those in different locations. What stories do you have from those experiences?
One stands out, to be honest, and I think this is a reason why my career advanced. Actually, I did lots of draws from the studio, but one year I got sent out to Zurich for the draws for, what would it have been, 2016 and 2020 maybe? What year was Russia? I can't remember.
2018.
So it'd be 2018 and 2022. So Russia and Qatar then, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, years in advance. I can't remember what year it was. I was out there. May have been 2008, something like that. And my goodness, did we not realise we were onto such a big story with what was going on with FIFA. And I remember being parked outside the FIFA hotel. I can't remember what day the day of the week the draw was on, but it was on maybe a Wednesday, and I was parked outside the Zurich hotel on a Tuesday, and suddenly realising we've got a big story potentially here, because there was a lot of unhappiness, couldn't understand some of it. And England obviously fancied their chances, and you hear that the Prince of Wales was coming out, and you hear all these different rumours. And then we're told, pretty much, we're briefed that if Putin comes to Zurich, that means Russia pretty much got it in the bag, because he wouldn't want to be seen with failure, but he wants to be there with triumph. And you think, oh, that's interesting. So the whole next day we're on lookout for Putin. There's no Putin. So you're thinking, right, you can rule out Russia. England really fancied their chances, and the video they'd done was incredible. And at this point, you're parked outside the conference centre where the draw is taking place, and there's rumours swirling all over the place. And then I remember for 2022, the Australian contingent, who were the favourites to get 2022, had left before the vote had been made. And you're thinking, what the hell's going on here? And they left very disgruntled, clearly thinking that something awry was going on. No arrests at this point or anything like that, which have happened down the track with FIFA. But it was a bizarre experience. And then England were humiliated. You remember, we had one or two votes, one of which was Jeff Thompson, our own delegate. And I think we got only one other vote to host the World Cup. So we were properly humiliated. And I had a huge story on my hands. And I remember interviewing David Dean, who was in floods of tears. I interviewed Boris Johnson, who stormed off my interview because obviously I had a great storyline, but I was also able to point out that the public transport worked in Zurich in minus 10-degree temperatures. He was the London mayor at the time, and our transport came to a standstill when it got cold. So he stormed off, which didn't do me any harm. And then I was broadcasting, because that was a 24-hour news channel, Sky Sports News. All the other European channels were in sort of pods by me. And because we had a story, they kept coming to me. So I had everyone gathered round my position, hanging on my every word. And I was absolutely loving it. You know, I was a sports journalist presenting in front of all these European countries, leading the agenda, really, and leading the story. And I was buzzing off it. I really enjoyed it. And off the back of it, I obviously impressed a few people, because my stock started to rise and I was given better shifts and this type of thing. And I remember an American news channel, I remember they rang the Sky Sports boss and told them that they've got a good reporter on their hands. And they were probably thinking, we're not sure who this kid is who works on Sky Sports News is. But that sort of put me on the map a bit. Mm-hmm. And listen, the story went from there, didn't it, of how Russia got the World Cup and how Qatar got the World Cup in 2022. It spiraled from there. But yeah, that was an amazing, amazing thing to be part of. And I look back at it and thinking, wow, I was part of a huge story.
I still don't think we'll ever get the World Cup, unfortunately. I don't know why, because we've got the facilities to host it here and now, haven't we, really?
Yeah, you just never know. You just never know how the political landscape will go. Back then, we stood no chance. I don't think we realised just how it was decided. We were probably too upfront and honest, maybe, with our campaign. And we're not particularly popular, are we, on the global and European stage? But that could change. That could change, because the infrastructure's there. We know we can do it. The European Championships didn't help us the last time it was here, but we can prove that we can do it again. And one thing we are good at in this country is hosting big events, big tournaments, Olympic Games, World Championships. There's no doubt. And I think the world will accept we are brilliant at it. You've only got to look at 2012 and other events we've hosted. Britain is brilliant at hosting events like that. So I'm hopeful one day. You just never know what the political landscape will be.
Well, shortly after that, you actually stepped into the shoes of Richard Keys, presenting the coverage of the Premier League. That was in 2011. How did you prepare ahead of the games?
Well, it took me by surprise when I was given the gig. Honestly, I was still doing Sky Sports News then. I'd been away for nearly a year. I was ill and being treated in Southampton hospital, and I kept having setbacks, and I had a tumour in my stomach that needed to be removed, and la-di-da-di-da. So I'd been off for a long time, and I'd only come back in August of 2010, and that scandal blew up in the new year, didn't it? Yeah. And it took, it was front page news with Andy Gray eventually sacked, Richard Keys resigned, and it was a big story. And luckily I'd been totally separate and away from it, and I was given my big chance. They called it presenter idol, I remember, in the newspapers, and there were 3 of us put on trial for it. Gary Lineker was still the favourite to get it and come from the BBC to Sky, but that quickly became obvious that he wasn't going to do that. So the 3 of us were in the firing line. It was David Jones, who does the job now, myself, and Ben Shepherd. And I was the outsider of the party to get the job. Remember, I was 14-1 with Paddy Power, and I'd never presented live football before. Hence, I was probably the outsider. And yeah, I got off to a baptism of fire because everything happened so quickly with those guys leaving that I was quickly thrown in on a Tuesday night at Craven Cottage, having never presented live football before. And I did Fulham against Newcastle. And it wasn't great, to be honest. I would hate to watch it back. I remember I had Lee Clark, I think it was, and Chris Coleman in the studio with me. And we call it the green room. I'm sure you know about green rooms before a show. And I remember they were brilliant in the green room, but not quite so good when we went on air, and it wasn't a great show. From there, I went to Sunderland to do Sunderland against Newcastle, the North East derby. That didn't go particularly well either. And then I'm thinking, well, at least I've had a go. I told my wife it's probably not going to happen. And then I did the Manchester derby on a Saturday lunchtime at Old Trafford. And it was the one where Rooney scored with the overhead kick.
Yeah.
An iconic game. And then I think people probably thought I was a bit too nice to present live football. But I then had a row with Mike Summerby on air. And I'm thinking, this could go 2 ways here. This could either be the end or the making of me. And then, thankfully, it was the latter, because he was furious afterwards. And he said, we dominated that match. We deserve to win it. You look at your silly stats and it'll show that City were dominant. And I knew that the stats pointed to Man United. They'd had more of the ball, more chances. So I knew I was on good ground. So actually, I was sort of quite antagonistic and able to say, well, actually, Mike, if we look at those stats, you'll see that's not the case. United dominated this, this, and this. And he completely lost it with me. But I stood my ground. I held my own. And I think, again, a bit like my Zurich moment, my stock rose there, and suddenly I'm getting better games. And I'm thinking, I've got half a chance here of getting the big job. And I remember going into the boss's office in probably March or April time, towards the end of that season. And he said to me, Ed, I've got good news and bad. And I said, okay, let's start with the good news. And he said, you're the new face of Super Sunday and Monday Night Football. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is just like a dream come true. And then I said, what's the bad news? And he says, you're going to be working with Gary Neville. And my world fell apart. Because Gary just retired. He was probably the most unpopular player in the Premier League at the time. And I'm thinking, right, he's going to be my sidekick. And yeah, the story began there of what I look back as being a great partnership, really.
Of course, you had lots of special guests. Any in particular that you really liked having on?
On Monday Night Football or Super Sunday or both?
Yeah, both.
Listen, there were lots. I always loved having Latiz in the studio for obvious reasons. Yeah. Though the first time I ever had him in the studio, I think, was the first time I presented at St Mary's, which would have been the 2012 season. I'd done the game at City, the opening game of the season, because they must have won the league the year before with the Aguero goal. I think that's what it must have been. And we led at the Etihad, and I'm thinking, this is unbelievable. And all the Southampton fans, in those days, the studio's in a different place at City now, but it used to be at the sort of behind the away fans. So the entire Southampton contingent turned and celebrated with me. And I'm obviously meant to be neutral as the sort of face of Sky Football. So I sort of had a little wry smile on my face. And we then went to St Mary's, and I had Latiz in the studio, and we went 2-1 up. I think Lambert and Schneidlin scored. I can't remember. Anyway, we're 2-1 up. So Latiz and I go outside the studio to sort of soak it up and revel in it, thinking, oh my God, we're going to beat United. And having lost against City 3-2, we then lost 3-2 at St Mary's to a Van Persie hat-trick. But I loved having Latiz in the studio. Paul Merson's one of my favourite people in the world. I used to love with Merce. Whenever you were at Arsenal, the Emirates was a great place to present. If ever you had Paul Merson, obviously Thierry Henry as well, you were treated like royalty. I mean, it was like waiter service in the studio. It was unbelievable. Thierry had a real aura about him. Graham Souness was intimidating, but a great man. I loved Ray Wilkins. I miss him very much. The late Ray Wilkins. He was lovely to me because I went into a very difficult atmosphere when I first started, and Ray would put an arm around me and really look after me. He'd always call you fella. I'll look after you, fella. Ray Wilkins was a diamond of a guy. You'd always say, how are you, Ray? And he'd all go, dangerously well, fella, dangerously well. Loved him, absolutely loved him. My regulars were obviously Cara, Redknapp, Neville. But lots of other people I enjoyed. I had Maurizio Pochettino, I loved. He's my favourite Southampton manager of all time. I had Ronald Koeman in the Monday Night Football studio. That was a great experience. Eddie Howe was brilliant when we had him on. You could see he was going to be a star, an absolute star, which is the right thing. Probably the wrong thing or the right thing to say to you, but at the time he just knew.
No, he's a legend. He's God. That's what I nickname him.
Yeah, you just knew when we had him on the show that he was the real deal. He really was. Very, very intelligent guy.
You probably had a lot of encounters as well. I'm guessing you were speaking about Jamie Redknapp, but Harry Redknapp as well.
Yep.
He's a bit of a regular on this show. What stories have you got? Everybody's got stories about Harry. What stories have you got with your encounters with him?
So he'd be a manager most of the time when I had the job. Probably QPR, he was in charge, wasn't he?
Yes.
That was a mad, mad place when we were presenting their games. Harry's just, I love Harry. But, your early dealings with him were generally through a car window on transfer deadline day. The most extraordinary story is when he was befriended. It would take 20 minutes to tell the whole story by a guy who pretended he was a jockey. And Harry took him in. And this guy obviously was talking racing with Harry, and Harry obviously liked him, and he kept saying he was a jockey. And he'd go to Champions League games with Harry when he was at Spurs. He'd be doing he wasn't a jockey at all. But I can't remember what name he gave, but he gave the name of a jockey. And one day, that jockey was actually at a race meeting where Harry was. And it was as if he'd never met Harry before in his life. And Harry's thinking, hold on. That's not who I think it is. And the whole story unfolded, and Harry had been properly duped. And I love the story of Paul Merson telling Harry that he needed time away from the game to recover. Because obviously Paul had his issues at the time. And Harry said, fine. See you in a couple of weeks. You go and get yourself sorted. The next thing he knows, a guy called Michael Tabor, who's a big racehorse owner, told Harry he'd seen Paul Merson on the beach in Barbados. So Harry was very trusting of people and players, but just an all-round great guy and great manager. Bournemouth through and through, as you know, living nearby, passionate about your club, and just a funny, engaging, wonderful guy.
Honestly, he's a lovely, lovely man. And I don't believe Paul Merson got in that much trouble about that either, did he?
No, because Harry was so nice and so forgiving, wasn't he? And they had so much in common. Harry loves his horse racing, racing. And I'm not sure Sandra shares the passion for horse racing. And Harry's got a really good horse called Shake 'em Up Harry. And whenever he must have 20 horses now, Harry. But I think Sandra thinks he's probably got one. So whenever he has a horse running, that's Shake 'em Up Harry. So Shake 'em Up Harry runs an awful lot.
There's another man as well that I did want to mention. I've just recently finished reading his book, and that's, of course, Chris Kamara. Who can miss him? Honestly, probably one of the nicest people that you'd probably ever see on TV. Did you have many encounters with Cammy, and did he give you any more Cammyisms that you used to come out with?
I used to see lots of him. I probably see more of him now than I ever did when we worked together. Because he's another one who loves his racing. I saw him at Goodwood, I saw him at York, and he's on brilliant form. As you say, he's just the nicest. I get quite emotional speaking about Cammy, what he's been through, and I hope he's been well looked after by various employers, because he's given so much to the game and so much to everyone he's worked for. He's a heart on the sleeve man, football through and through, but just the most lovely fella. Bless him. Again, when I started on Soccer Specials, I was so reliant on the likes of him and Alan McAnally. They were probably the two senior reporters, and they'd do anything for you. They were brilliant, so committed, so kind, so generous with their time, because I was just bedding in, and they'd look after me. And Cammy was an all-round superstar, and it's just so unfortunate what happened to him. When you're in that line of work and you go through that misfortune, particularly with your voice, that's brutal. That is so unkind. That must be so difficult to deal with mentally. And yet there he was, smiling, in really good form this summer. I love seeing him. Absolutely love seeing him. Loves a bet on the horses. Shares the same passions as me. And I had my 2 children at Goodwood, and the one thing my son, who's 15, wanted from the day was to have a picture with Cammy. And of course, Cammy took all the time in the world with him. I think probably gave him his number and said, if you ever need any help, give me a shout. And that is Chris Kamara in a nutshell.
Yeah, he's an absolutely lovely man. You can tell. And some of the funny thing is he doesn't take himself seriously. When he did used to make, what's the one? It was the Portsmouth. Was it Portsmouth?
Yeah, the sending off.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sending off. Yeah. Sending off, Jeff. Yeah. Absolute genius. Absolute genius. He was always getting people wrong and things wrong, and was always very self-deprecating, able to laugh at himself. And when you're a presenter and you've got someone like that to add humour into a show, it's an absolute godsend. And Stelling would have loved him, absolutely loved him, because you could have a laugh with him. But Cammy knew when to be serious. He was a manager, obviously a great player as well. He knew his football, so you got everything from him. A presenter's dream.
And of course, at the end of the book as well, I don't want to give anything away, but hopefully, fingers crossed, what is at the end of the book does work, and hopefully we'll see him back on the screens.
Honestly, I wouldn't be a dry, if he manages to do that, there wouldn't be a dry eye in the house.
Definitely.
Everyone loves Cammy. Wherever he goes, you see him, and he's just, everyone wants a word with him and put their arm around him and photo with him. He's a magnet of love. He really is.
Well, your final game, and we did speak about this just before we come on, was against Manchester United at Old Trafford, and it was the bomb scare game. Ed, so talk us through it.
Well, it was quite a dramatic lead up to the game for me, because I'd asked Sky. ITV had approached me that January, and I'd agreed to join ITV, and I was leaving Sky, crikey, in April time, maybe early May, and it kept it secret. I didn't want it to be in the papers and that type of thing. So it kept it fairly quiet. And then Leicester won the league, famously on Monday Night Football. They weren't playing. Jamie Vardy was having his party, and Tottenham couldn't win at Chelsea, which they needed to do to stay alive in the title race. So we'd done Leicester winning the league, and then towards the end of the season, news was starting to sort of filter out that I might be leaving my job at Super Sunday and Monday Night Football. But I went to Manchester for the last game of the season, Man United Bournemouth, as you say. And I thought I'd let everyone know on the Saturday night that this is it. I'm leaving. I'm going to ITV to be the face of horse racing. And I put my card behind the bar in the team hotel. Within a few minutes, maybe an hour, it was front page news that I was leaving football to go to horse racing. So it was quite a sort of dramatic 24 hours, if you like. And then in the studio, we're building up to the game at Old Trafford, as you say, Man United Bournemouth, and in come the police. When someone comes into the studio, it's quite a sort of an intense, quiet environment with lots of security, and you're thinking, what the hell's going on here? And the next thing you know, you've got to evacuate immediately, and you're like, well, I'm on live TV. How am I supposed to evacuate? But we had to. The police weren't taking any bargain pleas or anything. We had to get out. So off we went. I can't remember how we filled the sort of half hour it took to set up in the car park, but set up in the car park we did, near the ITV truck to the far end of the car park at Old Trafford, as the ground was being evacuated, and we broadcast from there, still thinking the game would go ahead. I've got a picture of it on the wall somewhere. I don't think it's not one of those, but I had Thierry Henry, Graham Souness, I can't remember who the third, it might have been Jamie Carragher in the car park with me. And then we're filling time, and then we get the announcement the game's abandoned. And I'm thinking, this is my farewell game. Having said goodbye to everybody, I then had to go back. I think was it the Tuesday night? Might have been the Wednesday.
Yeah,
night. Probably.
I think
probably
it was
Tuesday.
either Tuesday or Wednesday, wasn't it? I think it was Tuesday, because there wasn't much riding on it for us.
Yeah, so Bournemouth. I never got to present at Bournemouth. I can't remember ever doing a home game at Bournemouth. Because how long would I had you? One season maybe in the Premier League in my tenure? One
season.
Never got to present Bournemouth at home, but my final game in football, well, might not be my final game ever in football, but my final game as the face of Super Sunday was on a Tuesday night with Bournemouth involved, which seems today very appropriate.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, like you say, you did go over to ITV to present horse racing. Was it really the love of horse racing that tempted you, and was it quite difficult to leave, considering the Premier League and the amount of attention?
It was very difficult to leave because I loved what I did. I was unbelievably fortunate to have 6 years presenting 2 iconic shows with brilliant people. I've learned more in my life from Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher than any other people on the planet, really. I learned about hard work, about dedication. You know, these are 2 guys who wouldn't be the most talented sportsmen in the world, yet both played international football. Nev won 85 caps for England, won everything, and probably would have been a better cricketer had he chosen that path. But they were 2 people who got every last drop of ability out of themselves. And I flew on their tails. You know, when I was with Nev to start with, everyone hated us. Our first game, I remember Man City Swansea, we were slaughtered for it, absolutely slaughtered for it. You know, we were trending globally. It was really a brutal period, that. But we turned it round and we were flying along, absolutely flying along. He was winning loads of awards. Monday Night Football was popular. And then he said, in that true Sir Alex Ferguson way, like Fergie did with a Man United team that just won the league, he'd always change something. He'd always say, we need to change something, whether that means moving on Roy Keane, Yap Stam, bringing in a new head of sports science. He'd always find a way of being there and going again. You know, that Man United team were the first ones really to be able to retain a title. Normally a team would win the title and then drop off the next season. Guardiola's doing it now, but Fergie was the first one to really do it. And Nev brought that attitude to Monday Night Football. Yes, we were winning awards. Yes, we were flying along, but he always wanted to go again and make it better. And one day he said to me, we need to change it. And I'm like, don't be daft. You know, I talked about all my nightmare shows that I'd culled, and now suddenly I'm onto a winner and he wants to change it. And I was totally opposed to it. I'd made, you know, the most unpopular football in Premier League history vaguely popular. Now I had to do it all over again with Jamie Carragher. But it was a genius move. And I worked with Scott Melvin, the producer, Duncan East, the director, and along with Nev, they were 3 geniuses in different ways. The latter 2 were real, absolute television whizzes. They were brilliant. I owe so much to them. But I learned a lot from Nev and I learned a lot from Jamie Carragher. And I'll never, ever, I'll probably be able to portray the thanks I've got for that. But it was the end of an era in 2016 because Nev had gone to Valencia, where he had a bit of a disaster as manager and was assistant coach to Roy Hodgson. So he wasn't working with me and I missed him greatly, and it felt like the end of an era, and I was ready for something different. I was ready for a new challenge. And I've always wanted to work on terrestrial television, which is a different beast to working for a satellite channel. And it just felt like too good an opportunity to miss. For various reasons, I was keen to do it. After my illness, I was ready to take a risk. I think it's fair to say I had a very different attitude towards life. I was given a second chance at life, if you like. So I was willing to take a risk. And I wanted to do something different. Football was probably my first passion, if I'm being brutally honest, but I also loved my racing. And it just felt like an unbelievable opportunity. And to this day, I've been with ITV now for 8 years, and I could walk down Andover High Street this afternoon and I'll still get asked, why did I leave Premier League football for racing? Because 95% of the population wouldn't understand why anyone in their right mind would leave Premier League football and those 2 amazing shows to go and do horse racing. But I look back at it being probably the best decision I've ever made, really. I absolutely love what I'm doing and the people I'm working for.
Of course, the Grand National at Aintree is seen as the pinnacle, isn't it, really, of racing? But is there any other venues that you prefer, or what's your favourite venue to present at?
It's just such a good question that I get asked it a lot as well. The truth is, in my line of work, every week is completely different. Every week is different. You know, I'm so pleased our game's on a Monday night because it actually means I can watch it, because normally on a Saturday I'm on TV somewhere. And the last few weeks I've been all over the place. I went up to Doncaster for the St Leger with 25,000 Yorkshire folk making quite a noise, amazing atmosphere at Doncaster. Then I went to Ayr last weekend, giant party for the Ayr Gold Cup. This week I'm off to Newmarket for what's much more of a sort of connoisseurs, much better racing, but much quieter. And every week is totally different. I love a big festival. I love Glorious Goodwood, where I get to play that cricket match, golf. They have a ball. It's just the most amazing week and one of the greatest sporting settings there is. Royal Ascot's the most intense thing I do. Again, goes all around the world, celebrating the best of British, but 5 days of really hard, intense work. The York Ebor Festival is very special up at York. That's a great racecourse full of lovely people. I like the summer because you're stood outside in the sunshine. In the winter, it's a bit harder after my promise to take racing fans to the heart of the action, which means we stand outside in the middle of the paddock. You can absolutely freeze. But again, I go to Wincanton down the road here, which I enjoy as much as a Grand National Day, you know, supporting a small track. I love going to Newbury, which again is local, where I worked, putting up guttering when I was 15 and 16, my first holiday job. And then there's Cheltenham and Aintree, which are just the absolute pinnacles of what we do. You know, you say the Grand National is the biggest race. It is, yeah, the biggest race in the world. But the Gold Cup is the one everyone wants to win. The Grand National is the people's race, while everyone inside of racing, you know, the class horse wins the Gold Cup. So the Cheltenham Festival is huge for me, and I love it. And then the Grand National is the biggest thing I'll ever do, really. You know, you can get up to 10 million people watching. You know, the biggest game I'd ever do in football would be Man United Liverpool or Liverpool Man United, whichever way round it was, wherever they were in the league. That was your most watched game. And when I presented it, you might get, you know, 2.5, 3 million would be a huge audience for a game of that size in those days. And you know, you get 2 or 3 times that to watch the Grand National. So trust me, when in your area, your director's assistant says 30 seconds till you're on air on Grand National Day, then your heart is beating out of your chest, I promise you, because there's 300 or 400 million people watching worldwide. It's a big one. It's a real adrenaline buzz.
Ed, I watch horse racing. However, when I put a bet on a horse race, I'm useless at it. Is there anything in particular you would look for and say, that's a good horse? I wouldn't go on for that one.
I'm a terrible judge of a horse, but I do study the form book and obviously do lots of research. I think one thing I'm good at doing is listening to the right people as well. But listen, I'd encourage you, come racing, have a look at them, have some fun with it, because, you know, gambling's good fun, but you need to gamble responsibly. Yeah. Gambling needs to be fun. Come racing, you go with what you enjoy. If that's be backing horses in Bournemouth colours, be that choosing one in the paddock that you like, be that any way you choose them, you know, just make it fun. And I wouldn't listen to me. I would be one of the worst tipsters on the circuit. And I've also, having worked for a bookmaker, know that I'm never going to win by punting. So I just do it, bet occasionally for a bit of fun, really, nothing more than that.
Grand National Day turns up and I get the newspaper and I'm looking at it like, yeah, that one's a good one. I don't really know what I'm on about, to be perfectly honest, but
yeah, but you go for it. That's
exactly.
As long as it's a bit of fun and gives you something to cheer and gives you a bit of pleasure and entertainment, that's what it's all about, really.
Or ask Harry. He might have some tips.
He's got some good horses. Yeah, ask Harry. Yeah.
Well, moving on to the game, of course,
yes.
A massive Saints fan. Let's go back, though, a couple of years ago to that relegation season. What went wrong, in your opinion, and were the club wrong to sack Ralph Hasenhüttl?
Possibly, in hindsight, possibly. You just never know. I think, why did we go down? I think we took a big risk with a raft of young players. I could see what they were trying to do. And you'd often go into, particularly Man City and Chelsea, and because we couldn't afford to buy them at the peak of their powers and cost. So you take a bit of a punt. Romeo Lavia would be a great example of a player where we very nearly got it very right. But we were very inexperienced for the position we were in. I think losing players like Romeo and others who you need in a battle at the bottom of the league was probably, in hindsight, where we went wrong. Who knows whether changing the manager was a bad move. The Nathan Jones appointment certainly wasn't a good one, but it's easy in hindsight, isn't it? I think, looking back at it, we just had a very young, inexperienced squad that I could see what they were trying to do, but they didn't have the nous in a relegation battle or the experience you need.
Do you think that Ruben Sellers, when he took over from Nathan Jones, do you think he was just going to hide into nothing? Do you think
a little bit? Yeah, I think so. I think morale was low, confidence was very, very low. And listen, what he's gone on to do, you can see he's a good manager. I think he was probably a good manager in a bad situation at that time. I think he really did have his work cut out, and I don't attach too much blame to him, if truth be told. I liked him, and I like him now.
I think he's doing quite a good job in another terrible situation.
Oh, yeah, the situation there.
Yeah.
He's
so
working miracles almost there, to be honest.
Ruben will hopefully one day get a normal job. But one thing that did confuse me about that season, it was positive for us, was Jack Stevens coming on loan. Now, considering what he's done, in a Southampton shirt under Russell Martin, was that a mistake?
Possibly. He wouldn't have been first choice necessarily at the time. We were stronger in that department, arguably, than we are now. But it didn't, to be honest with you, and I like Jack enormously, and he's a leader, and that those leadership qualities would have been very useful. But at the time, it didn't necessarily feel the worst decision that we'd made. There were other inexperienced players who we lost who just felt that little bit more costly.
Of course, Russell Martin did come in after relegation was confirmed and has done a very, very good job. Was you always confident of bouncing straight back?
No, absolutely not. No, God, no. We had confidence was rock bottom. I think that was his biggest achievement when he came in. He came into a club that was on the floor, really. And he built a lot of those players back up, brought in some good young players. We used the loan system extremely well. When you look at Flynn Downs and Harwood Bellis, who we built a lot of the season around characters like that. But I think Russell Martin did really well in just restoring and bringing players back who really had struggled, and your Adam Armstrongs and so on. It was a pretty brutal experience in the Premier League, and to bounce back like we did was impressive, really. So going into that season, was I confident? No, I wasn't really. And we had a shaky start as well, which didn't help. And we were on the receiving end of some pretty hefty defeats early on, which you're thinking, crikey, we could be in trouble here. But he turned it around brilliantly. That was a serious achievement for a manager. Don't forget, he was very, very young, remains very young, only in his late 30s. And it was impressive what he did. It really was.
It did look at times that he was going to get into the top two as well, Ed, towards the end of that season. Was you disappointed that you didn't do that? And what do you think, was it that fatigue catched up with the players in the end?
Yeah, a little bit. But I think it was also there were three high quality teams in the league. In fact, four, to give Leeds their due, because they obviously finished above us. I just think Leicester, Ipswich, Leeds and Southampton were four teams who were an absolute class above. And in many other years, with our points total and the way we played, and that long unbeaten run we went on was quite staggering, really. I think in a lot of other seasons, we would have deserved to go up. We were just in a freak championship season with outstanding sides. And what was worrying going into the playoffs, we just lost that momentum. We got absolutely battered at Leicester City one evening. And you were thinking, oh my God, the players have run out of gas here at just the wrong time. We'd lost our momentum. So again, just like he did at the start of the season, Russell Martin deserves enormous credit for picking them up, taking us into the playoffs, where I always thought those top four were different class. So I always just had that hope that the class of Leeds and us would tell in the end. And it took a while in the semi-final, but eventually we outclassed West Brom, and then it was all eyes on Wembley all of a sudden.
Of course, Joe Rothwell and David Brooks were on loan as well last season. What did you make of their contributions?
Terrific, particularly Brooks, actually. And I'm sure he'll come into your side soon. And he was invaluable for us. A real live wire on the right-hand side. Such a shame he got injured in the playoff final, but good character, played really well for us. Jay's role was a bit more cameo, if you like, off and off the bench. But again, was an important fresh pair of legs in the centre of midfield and did really well on occasions and scored important goals for us as well. Two good characters who both played important parts late on in the season.
Of course, David Brooks has been through so much. And I remember, meeting him just after he got the all clear. And it took him a long time to build himself back up. But I think he's almost there. He's almost there. Do you think because of the way Andoni Iraola plays, that's why he did have to go out on loan? Because I'll be honest, Ed, when he did go to Southampton, I was like, why? Because he just played against Swansea in the Cup, had a fantastic game, and I thought he can step into our side. But do you think it was really that building his strength back up after, of course, Hodgkin lymphoma?
I'd imagine so. Yeah. Confidence thing, fitness thing. He was always going to play quite regularly with us, and you'd like to think it did him the power of good. I'd love to have kept him, to be honest, because he was such a popular player off the pitch as well. And yeah, I hope he can get that regular place in the first team with you guys, because he certainly deserves it. And Saints fans will always be very grateful for what he did. And as you say, after what he's been through, which I can obviously see exactly how difficult that is. But hopefully he's got a similar attitude to me, and that he's got a second chance and he's going to take it with both hands and have a bit more of a carefree attitude and maybe be a bit more patient. But he's a player who deserves to be playing week in, week out.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Well, of course, he was at Wembley for that game against Leeds United. And it was a good performance. Everybody, though, Leeds were the favourites going into that. But Southampton seem to be in complete control. Do you agree with me on that, or do you think I'm just because I was wanting you to go up because I thought local derby, and I didn't want Leeds to go up. After all, we don't particularly like Leeds anyway.
It didn't feel like that, honestly. I had the most traumatic day because I was asked to go on Talk Sport before the game, and the Talk Sport studio was in the Leeds fan zone in Box Park. That was one of the most scary things I've ever done. I was lucky to come out alive, I think. And in the game itself, I'd never been or never presented a playoff final. I've been to Wembley with Southampton a few times, where it's felt like, obviously tense, but just a great day out, be it a final or a semi-final. I've always loved it. You know, going back to the early 90s, I went to the Zenith Data Systems final where we lost in extra time. Just great days out. You know, I look back on losing in the final to Man United. Great day out. This was completely different from the moment we arrived. It didn't feel like a great day out. It felt like an absolute pressure cooker. And I remember saying on the radio before the game, it's basically who can handle the pressure best. And we were the better side for probably an hour. But then that last 20 minutes and however many minutes of added time felt, I think it was probably 10 minutes, it felt like a lifetime. It was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And Dan James came on and very nearly single-handedly got them level. It's brutal, the playoff final. There was so little. We didn't dominate the game by any means. We rode our luck a little bit. But the margins, I mean, we go up, right, in that situation. Leicester and Ipswich have gone up with no great fanfare. We go up as if we've won the World Cup final. It's the best feeling in the world. The celebration was huge. The party afterwards was huge. It just felt amazing. My 15-year-old described it as the best day of his life. It was just extraordinary. And then Leeds, who miss out by, in racing terms, a short head, and their team gets decimated. And there we are, signing the players we had on loan, signing Aaron Ramsdale. I mean, you just have to pinch yourself. And that is brutal. The fine margins between success and failure in the playoff final. Honestly, if I was a Leeds fan, it's just absolutely brutal.
It must have been some party. But it's just getting to that point, isn't it? It's a case of, are we going to be drowning our sorrows, or are we going to be going out on the the best decision I made was, obviously I had a few invites, and I'm a Sky Bet ambassador, so I could have really done it in style. But my lad said to me, no, let's do it properly. Let's go in the thick of it in the Saints end. And at the time I was a bit skeptical about it. And I didn't think of going in disguise like Aaron Ramsdale did, but I wore a baseball cap and glasses at times. And do you know what? It was the best decision ever. Absolutely loved it. It was great. And the Saints fans were fantastic. It's probably my happiest. I always get asked my favourite football occasion. It was probably presenting the Aguero goal or Sir Alex Ferguson's final day at Old Trafford. But as a fan, that was my best day in football by a mile. I loved it. Well, I do need to, and to be honest, I have to ask this question, because if I don't, it's not particularly a nice question to ask. But if I don't ask it, people will moan. Ryan Fraser, he's a man that isn't very popular at Dean Court and appeared to have upset God, Sir Eddie Howe, again at Newcastle. Of course, he's moved to Southampton. What does he need to do to keep in the good books at St Mary's? And are Saints fans actually concerned that history is going to repeat itself for a third time?
Well, we can only go with what we see. And so far, he's been very good to us. So we don't need to get involved in any of the history of what's happened. He's been a terrific player for us, a bit like David Brooks was back end of last season. This is a guy who played at left wing back in the playoff final, totally out of his comfort zone, and did a fantastic job up and down. Doesn't win too much in the air. You're worried about him at the back post, aren't you? with an aerial battle, but he gives you everything on the pitch. And I can't fault him for that. Obviously, we've not experienced what you and Eddie have. And so far, I can't fault him. And he's not going to be first choice week in, week out. But so far for us, you know exactly what you're going to get with Ryan, which is, 110%. He'll play wherever you want him to play. And he's a very, very useful guy to have in your squad. And so far, so good for us, I say with a wry smile.
I did meet him. Literally, it was just before he actually moved to Southampton permanently. And, I asked him a few questions. I said, "Oh, you're going back to Southampton?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think so." And I was like, "Why don't you come on this show?" He's like, "No, you guys don't like me very much." Of course, he was with somebody beside him. I think it was probably his agent. His agent was probably thinking, "Who the hell's this guy?" And they realised I wasn't a threat. But yeah, I hope, fingers crossed, it works out for him, and also Southampton as well, because it'll be good for him to have that stability. And of course, new manager. Of course, he was under Eddie here. He was under Eddie at Newcastle. Maybe Russell Martin could manage him in a different way.
They seem to have a great relationship. You'll have seen the
Yeah.
video of when they were reunited in the press room. And yeah, he needs to work on his fitness a bit. I think he's lacking a bit of match sharpness at the minute. But yeah, we'll see. Proof will be in how it plays out in the next few months. But I'm hopeful.
Well, of course, Southampton have struggled a bit. Sorry, Ed, to adjust to the Premier League. But like you say, made some big signings. Are you confident Russell Martin can turn it around?
Crikey, I think you'd be brave to be confident, but I'm hopeful. I think the results haven't really reflected the way we've played. We played really well at times. We were excellent at Newcastle until they had a player sent off, and that actually worked against us. Against Brentford and Nottingham Forest, we were just undone by individual errors and a bit of a shock to the system in the intensity of the Premier League. Whilst in the Championship, you just had that time and you could get away with things in the Championship, you just don't in the Premier League. And so that's been a bit of a baptism of fire. The Man United game was very frustrating. I was up at Doncaster, and you missed the penalty and then they got the other end and score. And our confidence is brittle, very, very brittle. And then against Ipswich at the weekend, obviously I haven't seen the whole game, but I've seen plenty of highlights and what have you. We played really well. But again, when you don't get that second goal, we are going to be very susceptible. And, there was a real sting in the tail late on. But there were some really encouraging elements to it. Our problem, they're twofold, really. Just those individual mistakes at the back with the way that Russell plays and scoring goals. We look as if we're going to struggle to score goals, which at this level, when you're down there and you've got a good goal scorer, it just makes all the difference. And I'm just not sure where our goals are going to come from. In Tyler Dibbling, we've unearthed an unbelievable talent, but you're going to need your Cameron Archers, your Brereton Diaz's, your Adam Armstrong, who's still got to prove he can do it at this level. You need them scoring goals on a regular basis, and I'm just not sure that's going to happen. But I like what Russell does. There's plenty of positives we can take from the first 5 games of a season. It's very similar at this start, to the season that I talked about, that City and Man United game. There was a lot of doom and gloom, and we came good. It's very, very early days here, so I'm hopeful that we'll be all right. Confident might be going just a little bit too far.
Well, this is a big game, and Southampton will be searching for their first 3 points. But you mentioned confidence. I don't think we've got confidence, especially Evan Nielsen. Is this the sort of game that Russell Martin be looking at and thinking we can capitalise on that? They've just been beaten 3-0 against Liverpool. The Everton win was quite lucky, to be perfectly honest.
That was the most amazing game of the season so far.
It was unbelievable. To be honest, I thought Everton have been rubbish themselves. We're 2-0 down against them. I thought, there's no way we're going to get back in this, though. And got to the 87th minute, people had already walked out the ground by that point. And then just turned around just like that. But I don't think we're particularly confident, especially Evan Nielsen, especially some players in that squad. Do you think Russell Martin will have picked up on that?
I'm sure he will. Oh, God, yeah. And you've had a similar issue to us, really. in the sense that I thought you played really well to start with at the weekend, and then errors and a side like that makes you pay. At the end of the day, this is something Graham Souness always taught me. Games against Liverpool, and for us, games against your Man Uniteds and Cities and so on, they're not the games that decide your season. It's for us last weekend against Ipswich, and for you on Monday night against us. They're the key games. When you're taking points off teams that are going to be around you, they're the big games. And at home under the lights on Monday, you could argue is the perfect opportunity for you guys to bounce back. While for us, it would have been a different ball game if we were coming to you off the back of 3 points against Ipswich, which we were moments away from getting. It would feel very different, and our confidence is very, very brittle. So, it's going to be interesting to see who's the more confident of the two.
Dare I even remember, you did beat us last time round at Dean Court, even during that season. So hopefully, fingers crossed, from my perspective anyway, that's not going to happen again. I'm sure, Ed, you'll be more delighted with that, won't you?
Yeah, I think you can expect us, even at your place, you can expect us to have plenty of the ball, the way we play.
One other question as well, and I know we did discuss this before we went on air. Is this a rivalry? Everybody's going to want me to ask that.
Yeah, it's a rivalry. Of course it is. Yeah. Whatever, it's called the New Forest Derby, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a rivalry, but it's a good rivalry. I like it. I really like it compared to some of other. Portsmouth rivalry is horrible, really. I'd be reluctant to take my son to a Southampton Portsmouth game, which is such a shame. While Saints Bournemouth, no problem at all. As I say, it's a shame I never got to present a game there. I'd really have wanted to, and I'd have hated this on a Monday night. I had a terrible record presenting Southampton games. My first game was that City game in 2012. I didn't present a live Southampton win, until January 2015. Jose Font used to call me the curse because I just could not present a Southampton win for love or money. And I hated it. I hated presenting Southampton games. If I was presenting on Monday night, I'd be dreading it because, you have to stay neutral and upbeat, and your heart just falls through the floor when your team gets beat. And I really look forward to Southampton in the Premier League and me presenting it. And I ended up really not enjoying it until Dusan Tadic scored at Old Trafford in, I think it was January or February of 2015, and the monkey was off my back. That was one of the best days of my life, and I was no longer the curse. So I quite like watching from afar now.
Are you coming down for the game on Monday?
Absolutely not. No.
Are you sure you can't present?
I would be going, but Southampton fans, for one, wouldn't want that. And I'm going to watch it. Something very close to my heart is a charity called Well Child, children's charity that I'm an ambassador for. And they have their awards night with all the kids who are award winners. And it's a 5:00 start in London. And I'll be done by 8. And I'm going to watch the game with Johnny Bairstow, the cricketer, actually, who's a Leeds United fan. So hopefully he'll be supporting Southampton that night. And we're going to watch it with a pint of beer probably somewhere. And I find it very difficult watching Southampton sometimes, and I'm sure Monday night will be no different.
No, fair enough. And fantastic work on the charity as well. I did read quite a bit about that as well. And do tell everybody where they can donate as well.
Well, the Well Child website's the place to go, and I have a golf day for them, and they're amazing, really. When I was in hospital, it just broke my heart seeing the children's cancer ward next door, seeing kids in hospital. So I always said if I got better, which thankfully I have, I'd do something to get kids out of hospital and nursed at home. And what Well Child does is they nurse seriously ill children at home, which I think is so important for young kids. And it's an amazing charity. Prince Harry's coming over for the awards on Monday. I might try and ask if he wants to watch Southampton Bournemouth as well. The Well Child's website is the place to go, and any donations help. And to help financing the nursing of kids at home, I just think it's one of the greatest causes. And you see these kids on Monday night, it part breaks your heart, it part inspires you. It takes you on a roller coaster ride. So by the time of 8:00 at kickoff at your place, I'll be mentally and completely drained of all emotion, but it'll be a nice distraction.
No, I completely agree with you on that. And as a father of 2 children, it's every parent's worst nightmare, that. So no, well done, and thank you I'm sure from.
Well, yeah, it's well done. It's well done, Wellchild, really, and the nurses are absolute heroes and heroines in it all, really.
Well, we have to finish on a prediction. We always do this. We do this for every single guest. Now, most people do say that their team is going to win. Are you going to change it? Be a bit generous to Bournemouth, or are you going to say Southampton?
I'm an eternal pessimist. Mm-hmm. I did a preview show the other day for a Man United game where we got gubbed 3-0, and I thought we'd win there. But Bournemouth's a club, I'm not just saying this to you, Bournemouth's a club I really, really like. I like everything about the club and what's happened there. I wish I got to present there, as I keep saying. And you're going to be fine this season. There's no two ways about it. You're going to be absolutely fine. And I hope you take sympathy on us and want us to stay in the Premier League to keep the South Coast rivalry going. I think on Monday night, I think it'll be a very tense, edgy affair. And I think I'd be very happy with a draw, actually. I think it'll finish 1-1. You need to keep an eye out for Lallana, who's back playing really well at the age of 36. Yep. You need to keep an eye on Tyler Dibbling on the right-hand side, who's been fabulous, really exciting 18-year-old. In the centre of midfield with Flynn Downs and Fernandez, we've got that sorted. It's just goal scoring that is the issue. Our back four were much, much better last weekend. Harwood Bellis is a future England player. There's no two ways about that. We've got good quality, but Bournemouth are a side I respect enormously. So I'm going to go 1-1. What about you?
Well, I'm not going to bet against my own team, Ed. Sorry. I am going to go for a 2-1 win. I've said this every single week, but it's not come true yet. Evan Nielsen is going to get off the mark this week against Southampton. And I'm going to go for Semenyo. Absolutely love that man. He's a fantastic player. So I'm going to go for a 2-1 win. But like you say, Ed, I do, and it's funny that some people look at it and think, well, Bournemouth fans want Southampton to go down and Southampton fans want Bournemouth to go down. I don't want you to go down. I want you to stay up. What's the benefit of seeing Everton in the Premier League for another season instead of Southampton?
And I think the same. I'm a big fan of Bournemouth for a number of reasons. I like flying out of Bournemouth Airport. I like going to Bournemouth. I like playing golf just outside Bournemouth. Going to Portsmouth's a bit harder for me, but I have no problem going to Bournemouth, shopping in Bournemouth. So I want Bournemouth to stay up as well. And I don't think you'll have any worries. Honestly, I don't think you'll have any worries at all. There are many worse sides than you guys.
And likewise, I really, really do want you guys to stay up. It is that. It's a local derby. And we haven't got anybody else really around us. It's those games. There's a little bit of banter, but that's fun. It's all friendly, isn't it? Really.
I think so. Mostly.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, Ed, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. All the very, very best with what you do at ITV Sport. All the very best with Wellchild. It's a fantastic organisation. And thank you again for, setting that up and continuing the hard work for all that. And wish you all the very, very best.
It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
And thank you everybody for joining us. Remember, hit like, subscribe and the bell button below. It helps this channel to grow. Now, Southampton fans, check out the interview with Tiff Nadell, of course, formerly of Top Gear, now at Love Cars, also was on Fifth Gear. Go check that out as well. And shortly after this game, I'll be doing something quite special as well. So keep your eyes peeled. We've also had other interviews on this show. We've had Omid Jalili. We've also had the likes of Tom Meehan from Kasabian. Richie Neville from Five, Richard Archer from Hardfied, Damon Minchella from Ocean Colour Scene, Adam Devlin from the Blue Tones, and there's lots more. And of course, Harry as well. Until the next one, up the cherries, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us.
The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.